Welcome to our webinar today, Batter Up, a conversation about Asian American representation in management at MLB. I'm David Inoue, the Executive Director for the Japanese American Citizens League, the oldest and largest Asian American civil rights organization. We have nearly 100 chapters across the country, many located in or near cities with Major League Baseball teams. Before we begin today, I would like to have us all just pause for a moment of silence for the thousands of victims of gun violence in this country. May we contemplate what our nation's lawmakers can do to reduce the risk of our communities becoming victims of gun violence, as the communities in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay were this past week. For that moment, I would like to now ask Larry Oda, JACL's national president, to offer some remarks about today's program. Larry.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to present this program, which has been a while in the making through the cooperation between JACL and Major League Baseball. Recent years have seen a marked increase in the number of Asian American and Asian baseball players, which has also led to increased interest in baseball from many in the Asian American community. For many, they are excited to see more players that look like them on the field or share the same name on their jersey. At JACL, we recognize in working with many of our partner organizations that diversity is more than just what we see on the surface. In this case, I was saying the diversity is more than we see on the surface. It's what we see on the playing field. While few expect to become a major league pitcher, there are many opportunities to be involved in baseball for those of us lacking elite athletic skills. Today, we wanted to highlight that part of baseball with some of the leading Asian American representatives off the field, but who are just as important to the game and to the Major League Baseball organization and its franchises, and to perhaps inspire someone in our community that this is a place that they might want to go to work someday. We are grateful for the partnership of MLB and recognizing the need to highlight their diverse staff, but also that they can and are trying to support and promote employees of diverse backgrounds. Leading Major League Baseball's effort to promote a diverse and inclusive game and organization is Billy Bean, Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Special Assistant to the Commissioner. Billy played professional baseball from 1987 to 1995, including a season in Japan. He was the second MLB player to come out as openly gay after he had ended his playing career and was brought back to MLB in 2014 as the ambassador for inclusion. He now oversees all DEI aspects of the organization. Thank you to our partner in Major League Baseball, Billy Bean. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you, Larry. It's such a privilege to be here today and the opportunity that I have to introduce an amazing panel. And I just want to welcome all the JACL members all across MLB, the people that work, our colleagues, for joining today. You're going to meet some very, very interesting people. I have the good fortune to be friends with all of them uniquely and individually, and I'd like to get this started by making those introductions. The first member of the panel is CJ Widenhouse. CJ is a Senior Director of Legal and Business Affairs at Major League Baseball. CJ joined MLB in 2008, and as Senior Director, she supports an array of MLB and club businesses with a particular focus on sponsorship, marketing, and ad tech. CJ was born in Japan, and at age 9, her family moved permanently to the United States, and I think you're going to find an incredible story with her today. So CJ, thank you for joining us. Next up, we have Daryl Lampa, who's head of talent and acquisition at MLB. Daryl has worked alongside me since my arrival at MLB, and he's responsible for leading the talent acquisition team, all that process and strategy for Major League Baseball. And his team focuses on recruiting from entry level to executive senior level hires Daryl is the co-chair of the Asian American Employee Resource Group, MLB Asian, at our office, and is just a great role model and mentor to many. Daryl, thank you for joining. Next up, we have someone who's new to our MLB family, who you're going to enjoy very, very much today. Jane Sun is co-head of the foundation and all community engagement for the New York Mets. Jane has great passion about all things DE&I, and she made a huge pivot in her life. But when she joined the New York Mets in 2021, former lawyer, worked in all across the world, and we're looking forward to her sharing her experience with us today. Thank you, Jane. Next up is Catherine Cheng, who is VP of People and Culture at alongside all DE&I initiatives for the Seattle Mariners. Catherine just joined the Mariners. I've had a great opportunity, my team, to work closely with her as we're preparing for All-Star Game this summer in Seattle, and that gives us a really good chance to work closely with the Mariners. I'm excited that Catherine is a part of baseball. As part of her DEI responsibilities, she'll be responsible for seeking new and improved and innovative ways to cultivate the Mariners culture, lead internal and external DEI efforts, and much, much more. Thank you, Catherine, for joining. And next up, finally, Stephen Nelson, who's had a big week. He's a MLB network fixture and NHL network as well. Stephen, we're extremely proud and grateful that you're here today. You've just been named to the incredible legacy of broadcasters by joining the Los Angeles Dodgers organization. And as a former Dodger, I'm very, very proud of you for that. Stephen describes himself as a proud Yonsei, a fourth generation Japanese American. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. He's going to be on a tight schedule. He's got a show to do, but he made time for us, so I hope we'll make the most of his time here. And finally, our moderator, Shane Barkley. Shane is the owner and operator of Japan Ball. We have a strong relationship with Shane because Shane worked at the MLB Commissioner's Office from 2010 to 2018 in international baseball operations. So he's part of the family and perfectly suited to manage the moderation today. Shane, we're looking forward to your inquiries, you sharing a little bit of your life experience as well. Thank you for taking on this big opportunity. And I wish each and every one of the viewers to enjoy the hour, take advantage, ask questions in the chat. And again, to all the panelists, thank you for making time and effort.
Thanks, Billy. I really appreciate that introduction. And of course, really appreciate the invitation from your team at MLB and the JACL to moderate this panel. Really excited to get going here. This is a topic that means a lot to me, not just because of my company, Japan Ball, it's a Japanese baseball company, but also because I am half Chinese. So the whole aspect of Asian Americans in the game is just a really important topic. So I want to give all of our attendees a chance to get to know our panelists a bit more now that Billy introduced them. Before we go around the horn and introduce everyone, just a quick logistical items for you participants. You can use the chat function for any logistical questions or informational questions you may have. And then the Q&A function, if you have questions for the panelists. And at the end of the hour, we're going to try to get to a couple of questions. So keep those coming and we'll sort through them and hopefully be able to answer your question at the end. So to start things off, as we mentioned, Stephen has to leave a little early. So we'll start with you, Stephen. First off, congratulations from me as well on your new job. Tremendous opportunity with the Dodgers. So we're really excited for you. My question has to do with, how you got started in your career, because you grew up in Southern California, an aspiring sports fan and broadcaster, of course. You have some role models, but not so much in the sports broadcasting industry that looked a lot like you. So, in this role with the Dodgers, it's the most hallowed broadcast team in all of baseball, arguably. Yeah. It's a lot of visibility. Yeah. So how do you go from the aspiring kid in SoCal to a trailblazing broadcaster?
Well, Shane, first and foremost, it's wonderful to be alongside you, Jane, Catherine, TJ, Daryl, and everybody in attendance. It's really a privilege to be here. Hearing Trailblazer makes me a little uncomfortable, if I'm being honest, because I feel like that's something that has to be earned over time. And I haven't called a game yet for LA, so I'm excited for the honor of trying to earn that. As Billy mentioned, I am Yonsei, fourth generation Japanese American. So I always say that I'm lucky to be standing on a lot of shoulders. Okay, and there's also a privilege that comes with being Hapa, right? Being mixed. My father is white, my mother is Japanese, and my middle name is Japanese, but Stephen Nelson is what you see on the lower third graphics on television. So I'm sure there are a lot of viewers or people who don't know what my heritage is or my background, where I'm from. And growing up in Southern California, like you mentioned, was lucky to call that home because there's such a vast and strong Asian American community. And, my mother was a charter member at the Japanese American National Museum in downtown LA. So I grew up there and learned how to origami and about my history and my culture, and going to Japanese school. So playing Sansei League baseball or VFW F4 basketball, it's just such a massive part of my life, always has been and always will be. In terms of the role models that I had in the industry, I do think that I was fortunate because, again, in Southern California, I could turn on the television and see Rob Fukuzaki doing sports on ABC7 Eyewitness News, or Frank Buckley doing news at KTLA. But you're right, nationally, there weren't many people. But in Southern California, you can see people who look like us in broadcasting. And so when the light bulb finally went off, I refused to turn it for too long, but it finally went off that I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. I knew that there were going to be other avenues for me to be involved in sport. Broadcasting was such a passion of mine. So anyway, getting into the real world, I just tried to immerse myself in the industry. I always knew that I wanted to be in front of the microphone, but I had to live beyond that experience. So it was internships and jobs that were not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera, trying to get as many different perspectives on that world as I could. And I feel like that is something, a perspective I try to maintain beyond work, just in life, just live beyond our own experience. And that has served me well. So now joining the Dodgers, it's honor of my life, honor of my career to join that lineage, and I hope to make the community proud in doing that.
So you already have the claim of the first Asian American broadcaster for an MLB team. Have you thought about down the road your legacy and like what you want people to think about when they think about Stephen Nelson, the broadcaster?
I'm always thinking about that, Shane, if I'm being honest, because I just want to represent well and make my family and make my community proud. I mean, I've definitely thought about the legacy of that headset, because when it comes to calling Dodger games on television, it's in Los Angeles, it's Joe Davis and then it's Vin Scully. So that is a pretty intimidating thing to walk into. Of course, there have been others who are filling in, which is what I'll be doing for Joe from time to time. But yeah, I was talking with Dave Sims the other day, who's a broadcaster for the Seattle Mariners, and he is one of the few broadcasters of color in Major League Baseball. And we were talking about representation, and he mentioned that I'm the only Asian American broadcaster now. And he said, look, that you've opened a door. Now you hold that thing open. And that is something I've always tried to do. Whether it be getting involved with the AJA and any job, is just to be available to the next generation, because the only thing I care about is further paving the way for the next wave of Asian American broadcasters in sports or news or whatever. And so whatever I can do to help do that, that's at the forefront of my mind, and it sits heavy on my heart for sure.
Great stuff. Well, I'm grateful for MLB at that app, because now anywhere around the country we'll be watching you call games this season, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us. I think that's unlikely we'll be able to hear from you before you have to run off to host your show at the network.
That's a good thing, I think, for everybody. That's a good thing. Thank you, sir, seriously carving out some time. And I do apologize that I can't stick around, but hopefully anybody who's interested, I'd love to connect with after.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. All right. So we're going to continue here going around the horn, letting each panelist introduce themselves a little bit more. I'm going to continue next with our two MLB league office employees to hear from their perspective, starting first with you, Daryl. So Daryl, you've been at MLB for about 10 years now, always working in recruitment. Over those 10 years, I know MLB's made a lot of efforts to diversify its workforce. You're also co-chair of the Asian American Employee Resource Group, as Billy mentioned. So I'm curious how your Asian American identity has influenced your career up to this point.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. It's crazy to hear you say 10 years. It'll actually be exactly 10 years next week. It's definitely been a journey. And I've observed and been a part of such positive progress of those efforts that you referenced earlier. Just taking a step back, I've always had a love for sports growing up. I was always active and played sports in school. It allowed me to connect with people in school that didn't look like me and came from different backgrounds. And I never thought that I'd be part of sports as far as my career, let alone baseball, right? Growing up in an Asian family, I think many of you all can relate to this. Your parents can be pretty influential when it comes to your studies and your career path, or at least try to influence, right? So naturally, I was encouraged to study medicine, accounting, or computers, which I did. And I studied computer science in college. I was good at it. I liked what I was doing, but there was more that I was looking for. So I decided to pivot and follow my passion for, helping others, and got into HR. I worked in various industries before landing here at baseball, from technology to finance and accounting, and now sports. And baseball was always a significant part of my childhood, right? As I mentioned earlier, that ability to connect with children, but also, for my family to connect in this country. Growing up, baseball games were always on at the TV. Every single Yankee game you could think of, it was on. The games, specifically, the game for my father and my grandparents, they watched it religiously. So it helped my relatives who immigrated to the States connect with people in our neighborhood, to learn the language and have something in common to talk about and assimilate to the culture. And it's wild to think that, after all this time, I'm here working here at Major League Baseball, talking about representation, visibility, and awareness of our community and our culture. As you mentioned, I co-lead the Asian ERG, and the ERG community gave us a platform to connect with people that identify as Asian and that are allies. And it was tough to do in our older office before we moved. Prior to the ERGs, physically the structure just wasn't conducive for those types of connections. I sat down the hall from Shane for a few years when I started, and I had no idea that he had an Asian background. But this group, gave us the opportunity to meet with people, with similar lived experiences. And to be a voice for our community in and around the office. To show, Asian Americans, can be in Major League Baseball as well. And from there, that group was, about, generating awareness about our similar and different cultures in Asia. It's such a vast diaspora that, it's fascinating to hear that, there are similarities and also a lot of differences amongst the cultures in Asia.
Are you guys hearing Daryl right now?
No, I think he's frozen.
All right. Daryl, hopefully you get back with us, but I'm going to continue on to CJ. Daryl, if you do hear me, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to continue on to your colleague, CJ at MLB. So CJ, you spent a large portion of your childhood in Japan. You mentioned that that was a challenging adjustment when you moved to the US from there. You've also worked 15 years at MLB, and to be frank, in what is an industry that is a white male dominated industry, and you've done extremely well in that industry. So I'm curious how your background and identity has been a challenge, or how it's been an advantage in your professional journey.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Shane, and thanks for the opportunity to join this really impressive and amazing panel. The time that I spent getting to know everybody has been really fantastic, and I'm proud to be here. I'm full of pride for my family heritage and traditions, but I'm going to be a little contrarian, and I'm going to resist centering remarks on my personal identity, because being Japanese American, like that in and of itself, right, that isn't serving, it's not the cause of any challenge or adversity. I'm pretty neutral about that. There's nothing sort of better or worse about being Japanese American versus being Latinx versus being anything else, or it shouldn't be, right? Like, I'm also realistic about the world. Like, the challenges and advantages that I think you're getting at, those don't, they really they stem from bias or discrimination in the workplace, right? And so that's where I think attention needs to be directed. Like, what's the bias? Not so much about like being Japanese. I'll give you an example where I think unconscious bias has yielded sort of both results, which you might consider to be an advantage or a disadvantage. But this scenario, I'll acknowledge, is more common in work environments where you have visitors like clients or vendors. It's happened that I've been in meetings where someone who's new or a visitor and doesn't know any of us in the room steps in to ask a question of some sort. And it's not uncommon for them to assume that a white man is in charge, and then that person, that other person, that white man, has the opportunity to provide guidance and sort of appear as a leader, or more basically leave a positive impression on the visitor or the client. Now, I've also experienced it, kind of in a reverse. I recall being in a meeting with a Black woman. This is not at MLB, where a new person arrived and started asking me questions, very clearly assuming that I was in a leadership role at this organization. But I wasn't. I was just in the office for one day on a support project. So my hope here is that to redirect the lens a little bit. I mean, I have, effusive things to say about my Japanese American community, the larger like Pan Asian community. But, I hope as we're investigating kind of workplace challenges that we're giving proper attribution to, the source of these kinds of privileges and harms.
Thanks for those thoughts. Yeah, I would love to follow up, but I want to keep going around the horn because you bring up some really interesting topics there. But I want to make sure we get to hear from our last two panelists, both of whom work for MLB clubs and made relatively recent transitions to the baseball world. So they offer a different perspective there. So Jane Sun, you have a really unique global perspective, right? You grew up in Toronto, worked in London, Hong Kong, Tokyo. You're in the legal world, and then you moved to baseball. So I'm curious, with this background, you're Korean Canadian. How has that given you a unique perspective throughout your career?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. First of all, I'd like to thank MLB and the DE&I team for inviting me to be a part of this panel with my distinguished panelists and also be a part of this event. I think these discussions are always helpful and important for all of us. And second, thank you, Shane, for being actually so thoughtful with framing your questions to us. I know that there are always different ways to ask the same question, but the way you ask this one helps not only provide some background to participants about me, but is also actually a nice way of giving me some flowers without me feeling awkward about doing it for myself. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So with that said, I was actually thinking a lot about this question, and not just and thinking about not just being Korean Canadian and what else has kind of given me a unique perspective throughout my career. And I think it's a combination of having grown up in Canada, being raised by immigrant Asian parents, and then having had the opportunity to live in all the countries that I have. I think all of that together has really given me the unique perspective throughout my career journey. We all know that everyone in Canada is nice and kind, and I can confirm that that's a pretty accurate stereotype. So that's definitely helped me. And then seeing how hard my parents have worked to give me and my two sisters the opportunities that they didn't have growing up definitely gave me the motivation to want to work hard and make them proud. I know that Daryl, you made a point about it. I mean, I definitely followed the career of being a lawyer. They really wanted somebody, including their eldest daughter, to follow. And I didn't do the medical school thing, so I went the law school route instead. So, I think that certainly, helped with them feeling proud, although they're just as proud now that I'm in this new role. And finally, I know that relocation opportunities don't always come up for everybody, and that moving cities is in and of itself really tough in any circumstance. But I would encourage anyone that's presented with a chance to work in another country, even if it's for a short period of time, to seriously consider it. Learning how to adapt in a different culture, even in an English-speaking country like England, where I lived for 3 years, it really did set me up to be patient, resilient, and more open-minded about everything. And so I think, it's not just about being Korean Canadian. I think it's, just a combination of, all the things that I mentioned that has given me a pretty unique perspective as I went through my legal career journey for 20 years.
Great stuff. We look forward to hearing more. But now let's go to Catherine Chang, our final panelist that I want to introduce. Catherine, thanks for joining us from DC, where I know you're attending the White House's Lunar New Year celebration, which is pretty awesome. She's at the White House because she's worked in politics in the past. And I would like to say she's kind of an activist from within in both politics and the corporate world, having worked at Starbucks and Microsoft. And the other iconic Seattle brand, the Mariners, is where you are now. So how do you view this position with the Mariners as an opportunity to deploy all that you've learned in these various stops beforehand?
Thanks so much, Shane. So I think that in all my positions in government as well as corporate, it's actually not too different because ultimately it's about people. But I think where sports comes into play that actually is different is that there's nowhere else that you could be sitting, let's say in politics, have totally different views, someone who has a far left view sitting next to someone who has far right views, and their team does something really awesome and they're hugging or they're high-fiving. I mean, I'm not sure that I see that anywhere else. And so taking that kind of connection, I think, is so important and such an opportunity because, baseball in particular is America's national pastime, and the definition of American is different than back when it became America's pastime. And so I think, the challenge and the opportunity that I see in this job and what makes me so excited is to see how we can make sure that sports reflects everything that we talk about in the world, in the country, but, from diversifying and increasing the fan base to the vendors, to the food that's served, and the things that we celebrate, because I think ultimately it's about being able to open minds, open hearts, and really provide an opportunity for people to see how people are different, but also the same.
Got it. Well, Mariners are lucky to have you. And we're all lucky to have you panelists here. So I'm going to dive into some more questions now that we've heard a bit from you all. CJ said I wanted to follow up with you, so let's continue that conversation a little bit. So I talked to Stephen about the topic of role models. You kind of talked about, walking into a meeting room and maybe assumptions people are making based on how they look in a professional setting. So I'm curious if you want to expand more on that topic, or if there was ever maybe someone who is a role model to you because of, how they looked, if they looked like you, just if you could expand on that, please.
Yeah, I think, right, that representation is important. I mean, I think it's a demonstration that, that there is opportunity and environment for someone who, maybe comes from a different background than sort of most of the other colleagues, can ascend and can achieve. And in my work life, I have decades of work life under my belt. I've been working continuously since my first part-time job when I was 15. So as I think about these things, I'm thinking about a lot more than just MLB. But in those decades, I've only had one job where an Asian woman led or held a senior position in my department or organization. She was general counsel of the company I worked for before MLB, and I definitely took pride in her achievement. And again, seeing her there, gave me some sense or some confidence that maybe my contributions would be fairly recognized because hers presumably were. So shout out to Sunam. She was a great leader. Still, given sort of how long I've been working, that feels like a little too few. One woman that that looked like me, that sort of I could look up to within my field of vision, if you will. So I'll also mention that, I have looked beyond my particular work organization or category of work for inspiration. And there are so many Asian leaders and innovators outside of, kind of my work function. I have taken great inspiration from people like, there's a trailblazing historian by the name of Jack Chen, many artists, a poetry collective known as I Was Born with Two Tongues. There's no shortage of Asian folks doing bold and brave work. And, I encourage, everybody tuning in to sort of seek out and explore, because as we are trying to ascend and increase representation and leadership, there's just, really people doing awesome work across the board.
Yeah. And while you're shouting out your former boss, I'll shout out my former boss, Kim Eng at MLB. For you participants, if you don't know Kim Eng's story, I recommend you look her up. She's a big leader in the baseball world, the general manager of the Miami Marlins. Daryl, I want to go to you because you have a unique perspective on this topic of leadership, representation, being in recruiting, of course. So could you talk a bit about what that means to you, please?
Yeah, of course. Hopefully you don't get cut out this time. I apologize for earlier.
No worries. We heard 99%, I'm pretty sure. So
I'll wrap up my thought as well and tie it into this, but it's extremely important, right? To see people that look like you in the profession and feel that you aspire to be in the sport, in leadership roles, so that that there is a place for you in this space. It speaks to that, speaks volumes to that sense of belonging. For the ability to see that as an outsider, as a candidate that's interested in careers at baseball, will naturally attract you to want to work here, but also help my talent team, attract and appeal to those candidates. Recently, we've, as part of our final interview process, we've made introductions to the ERG groups and the communities and members that candidates might find interesting, and it's helped them in their offer decision process. And after they accept, they have that community that, that will help support them, through their path here at baseball. So, representation in leadership positions, means opening the door to possible organic mentorship opportunities, visibility and access to the top, and, really helping each other ascend in our respective journeys, and to be visible and represent for all others in our community. And it isn't necessarily tied to sort of like your day-to-day job. I value the role that I play as a leader in the Asian ERG community as well. And I was starting on this topic before, but we've done some really good things to help develop leaders within our group. Various events that we've hosted. I was going to the first event that we hosted as an ERG community. It was actually the first ERG event that MLB had hosted, just given the timing of when we rolled this out, back in 2016. It was around Lunar New Year, and we presented on the significance of holidays to Asians, and how various countries in Asia celebrate the holiday, and it was over Asian food, traditional Asian food that was provided by local businesses. We've also, done events to generate awareness, not only within our group, but the rest of the MLB office about various business operations in Asia that many people may not be aware of. The player development centers across China, the significance of the WBC in Asia. And that was initial, but you fast forward to recent, we've built such a foundation of folks that identify as Asian and allies of our group. There's about 200 people on our membership list, and we've continued to do positive things within the community, promote engagement for our employees and support them. During the pandemic and the ongoing hate crimes, Asian hate crimes, really providing that safe space to check on our employees and educate our allies on what's happening within our community. We hosted mental health check-ins and guided therapy sessions for our employees. So these are all events that members of our community and members of our board have helped spearhead and help sort of leadership and visibility and representation amongst the group.
Sounds like some great events. And one of the not so great events you kind of alluded to is these hate crimes and, the ongoing racial prejudice against Asians and the uptick in crimes against them. Catherine, I want to go to you and hear your thoughts a little bit on this topic. And I'm curious how you view yourself and your professional role, how it's evolved in light of these events I mentioned, and especially in the last few years.
Yeah, it's been a heavy time. Obviously, I think that, history keeps repeating itself and it's like a vicious cycle. I mean, history informs the future, and shame on us for not taking that knowledge and education to make change and continue on that path of change, but just coming back to the same old things. So, as I look at my role, I've always been involved in politics and advocacy and all types of things, protesting and doing all kinds of things to try and bring attention to different types of issues. But I think that what's changed is now that, when you're in a leadership position, you have to own it and be willing to actually use that. And I'm talking about not just for just Asian American causes, but actually for all causes, because when you have that position, so for so many years being told throughout your career that, oh, you're not this enough, to be in this position. And when you're finally there, you have to be able to use your voice. So I think that, I feel like I've been doing that in the last several years, but I think that in this type of role, because it's a special place, there's an openness to actually having this change. A lot of times organizations will talk about, DEI and having all these types of programs, but the actions and the programs beneath it, the foundational pieces are missing. So I think having the courage and the willingness to stand up and say, we have to make changes, we have to do things differently. So that's kind of the point of view that I come from. And that's sort of how it's changed, especially with, Asian Americans. I don't know if all of you have experienced the same thing. I suspect maybe you have, but just the perception that we stay quiet and we don't speak up when things happen. That's not true. If you look at history, that hasn't been the case. It's just that we've been seen that way and we've been told not to. So I think what I look at now is we have to be seen and heard, and we have to be, again, willing to take that chance.
Thanks, Catherine. CJ, I know you had some thoughts on this topic as well. And I'm also curious, Catherine mentions like in her role, and she's a little bit more out in the community specifically. And you're not, CJ, you're not directly like in the DEI department or community engagement department. So I'm curious, not only your thoughts on the previous question, but how you incorporate that into your professional life.
Yeah, I think sort of the question of like how, my personal practice has evolved recently resonates largely because a lot of these kinds of activities, the, campaigns that Daryl's talking about and the work that Catherine's reflected on, it's outside of my function for MLB, right? Like my function is business and legal affairs, and I'm working on contracts and I'm working on compliance matters. Like this, DE&I work it's not my strict job function. But as my work, as I've matured over time, maybe, and as I have gotten a greater sort of as I've sort of increased in my work or ascended a little bit, I think I've developed a greater sense of urgency, and maybe got a little more ability to kind of work on some of these issues, right? And so I do have, again, a greater sense of urgency, right, to kind of roll up my sleeves. And even though, I'm fully engaged on the tasks for my job, to get involved with Daryl and the other Asian ERG leaders on some of the campaigns. And as Catherine was reflecting about the need for what I'll call coalition building with others, to get involved with the non-Asian ERGs as well, to kind of support the larger D&I goals of the organization, which are coming along quite nicely, because we have people like Jane, we have people like Daryl, who are really delivering on the opportunity to bring people together and to advance the cause. And so I'm quite enthused about the direction that we're all heading.
Likewise. Before I proceed, just want to remind the meeting attendees, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, you can put it in the Q&A function on Zoom. So Jane, I want to go to you next. As CJ mentioned, you are out there in the communities, and now you're doing it with your either literal or metaphorical New York Mets cap. I'm curious what your approach is when you go out into the Asian communities, and perhaps how wearing that Mets cap affects it.
Yeah. So it wasn't actually a prerequisite to be a baseball or Mets fan for my role, and and being fully transparent, I wasn't. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. I didn't actually appreciate how iconic and important the Mets brand is throughout New York City and within and throughout the community until I joined the Mets. And Daryl, I won't hold against you the fact that you mentioned the Yankees. It sounds like you may be a Yankee fan. But our fans are some of the most passionate and loyal and engaged fans that I've ever known. And so with that knowledge, I'm always mindful and respectful of that. And I always remind myself that what I do in the community is a direct reflection of not just myself personally and the Mets, the team, but also the owners, Steve and Alex Cohen. And because the home of the Mets is in the most diverse borough in the United States, I'm actually quite grateful and proud that I can be out in the Asian community and show that the Mets care, and also that the Mets understand and appreciate the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As a bit of an aside, even though I am co-head of the foundation and community team, which is obviously not a revenue generating department, I will share that I think I've been successful in leveraging the role that I have, and also, leveraging the fact that I am Asian to show how what we do in the community can have an indirect impact on, whether it's creating new fans, reinforcing our commitment to existing fans, and maybe even making a diehard Yankees fan a little bit jealous about us being out there.
Nice. Catherine, how about you? You've long been involved in Seattle's Asian community, serving on boards and just, working and doing good work for a long time. So I'm curious, you're wearing the Mariners cap, what your approach is in the Asian community.
So I think that, we actually sit right next to the Chinatown International District. So there's an even closer connection to our ethnic groups out in Seattle. But I think that, overall, it's not just about trying to recruit those fans. It's really all fans, because I think that if you can provide a place that's welcoming and that actually has the type of atmosphere where you would want to bring your families and your friends, basically, if you had the choice to take them, let's say, bowling or to the game or to, other places, you want to give them the opportunity to choose the Mariners or choose the stadium. And so I think, opening it up to all kinds of of people, regardless of directly to the race, then then I think that you're doing justice to what you're trying to do in just increasing the fan base, which I think all of us are trying to do. But specifically for the Asian American population, I mean, obviously there are some specific things. I mean, baseball is something that has been around a very long time in the Japanese American community, for instance. During the Japanese incarcerations, baseball was one of the things that kept them going, that gave them faith, that gave them hope, because they could actually play, America's pastime. So, I mean, it's, so there's definitely a deeper connection there. And if we can, draw from that, because again, I think that it's a lot about education and knowledge about different cultures and different people. So, right now there's so much interconnection between all the different communities, particularly in Seattle and the CID. But I think that we're seeing around the country, it's really becoming, much more integrated. So again, I think that the work that we're doing, or that what we're seeking to do, is just to make a place where everybody feels like they belong, and we're celebrating everybody and every background, every it should be a special place no matter where you come from.
Got it. Thank you. Before we get to the audience Q&A, Daryl, I wanted to go back to you one more time. If you could share with the participants, if someone is out there listening and realizing, hey, maybe I could work in baseball, how would you recommend they get started in pursuing that?
Yeah, no, I would say, one, certainly connect with any of us, through LinkedIn or email. You reach out to the folks that you see here. Connections can go a really long way in the industry. Outside of that, we all have sort of career sites that post all of our open positions, and they're very vast. I mean, they're not relative to specifically baseball operations. We have a large technology function that many people aren't aware of. We develop our own apps, gaming, infrastructure, VR. It's pretty diverse in terms of the various opportunities here within the sport. It's not solely on field and operations there. So I encourage everyone that's interested in exploring opportunities at baseball to look at MLB.com/careers. It also links you to the various club sites, as well as minor league club sites as well, for open opportunities, and they're kept real time too. So any opportunities that are filled, they're taken off our site, and any new ones will be posted on there. So they may change day to day. Another avenue would be going back to LinkedIn. I mean, we have a great employer brand that's on there that posts like topics and engaging conversations that kind of show our culture, the various events that the ERG communities hosts, and that's all found on our LinkedIn page. So I would say our career site, and also make those connections and reach out.
Thanks, Daryl. And I believe we'll put that link in the chat. And please, for the audience, just make sure you keep an eye on the chat. We're going to be putting a lot of essential info in there and links as we wrap up. So if I don't have time to say them at the end, check the chat now. But we do have some audience questions. First one is, how do you feel about representation of Asian or Asian American players playing in MLB? Do the players on the field represent the community well? And are there ways to increase or improve visibility? So I think I'm going to go to you, Jane, on this one. I know the Mets just signed a high-profile Japanese player who you haven't had a chance to see too much, but I think I'll go to you on this one, please, Jane.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I personally was very excited about, seeing us sign Senga. It is very big to see an Asian player, and even though I'm Korean, I think it's just as exciting to see a Japanese player. And I'm hoping that will, get more fans out to the ballpark, because, representation does matter. I'm hoping that I haven't had a chance to meet with him in my role. I do get a chance to interact with a lot of the players, to talk to them about their community initiatives. And so I'm hoping that he will be open to want to be out there in the community. We have a Japanese Heritage Night every year, and we've got that coming up in August, and that date was set before we signed Senga. So I can just imagine how much larger that evening will be for us. So we're excited about being able to really celebrate that night with him. whether or not he's pitching. I think it doesn't really matter. I think it's just going to be great to have him.
Yeah. Catherine, I don't think the Mariners have Japanese guys right now, if I'm not mistaken, but you've been in Seattle for a long time and they have the longest history of Japanese players of any MLB team. So I'm curious your thoughts on the subject too.
Yeah, I mean, anytime that you have someone who looks like you joining a team like that, that's so exciting. I mean, I can't tell you the excitement. We signed Colton Wong. Obviously, we have Ichiro, and we had, so you had several other Japanese players, Sasaki. Even John Wakamatsu as a coach or a manager. So, I mean, it's there. The excitement, you cannot temper that, because seeing people that look like you represented on the field, it's so important. And it's sad because I feel like it's waning a little bit, and we have to really drive the, from the little league up to really encourage more kids of color to play, so that they can strive to be in the big leagues, because it really is important to see that representation for everybody, not just those who are of the same race. But I think that I can't amplify that enough. It's exciting, and it's something that you would never have thought, I think, in some ways. And so having someone that looks like that at all, I mean, it just blows it out of the water, because also it helps to drive the culture piece. You can learn things from them. People are more willing to learn when someone is of a certain level, of a certain stature. They're more open to hearing their stories, to hear about their backgrounds. We have to leverage that. We've got to use that type of leverage that we have. Again, it's about being in the place and using that space. So I hope that all these young players that do come up, that have different backgrounds, are willing to actually be used for that purpose, not to just be tokens, but to actually be able to tell their stories and to really share what it means to be part of this culture.
Thanks, Catherine. Another audience question: what is your proudest accomplishment in your role at MLB? So Daryl or CJ, I'm putting you on the spot, so whichever one of you goes first. All right, Daryl's unmuted, so you're up.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple things that come to mind. One, someone asked me, like, do you realize how many folks you have affected in terms of, like, positively affected in terms of their careers, just the role that you, and I never really stop and think about that. So I've reflected on that the other day. That is, I'm very proud of that, to be able to help steer people and give them the opportunity to work in a career that they're passionate about. Outside of sort of my day-to-day job, I take great pride in sort of like the engagement with the ERG community. We are truly, one family. From an Asian ERG standpoint, one event that really comes to mind that I'm proud of is the opportunity to really connect other Asian ERG groups across the sports industry, right? So we started an Asians in Sports Symposium back in 2016. In collaboration with the NBA. And we've seen that grow over the years with involvement of, other leagues like the NFL, NHL, USTA, et cetera. And it's given our collective members the opportunity to meet with and hear from senior leaders and prominent figures in the industry, like Kim Eng, who you mentioned earlier, Ron Darling, et cetera. So that was another thing that sort of resonates in terms of like moments that I can reflect on.
Thanks, Daryl. How about you, CJ?
Yeah, I'll say that as I think I alluded to like the nature of my work before. I spend most of my time like on a computer, right, working on like written documents. So it's really special for me when I'm like out and about, and sort of the reason why I'm here, like my enthusiasm for the power of the sport to bring people together. When I see that happen in real life, so sometimes that might mean like going to a game and seeing like the families there and what a good time that they're having. And more sort of maybe more frequently is going out to where the games are on TV, or more specifically to our specific products where people are logging into MLB, their MLB app and watching a live game on their phone. Like, how many times have I been in an airport or a train station and I see people doing that, and everybody's kind of looking over and watching their game and maybe chit-chatting about it. And it's really, compelling to see people, no matter sort of what walk of life, like this is something that can bring people together. And I'm always very proud when I see that and feel like I'm supporting that and bringing that to the world.
Great. Okay, we're going to try to squeeze in one more. Jane or Catherine, whoever, unmute yourself first, it's yours. What steps can those of us in baseball take to engage our colleagues in communities in DEI events when everyone is so busy trying to win a championship? Jane, you're up.
I think this is actually quite easy. It's, for me, just the invite to something. Actually, I know everybody is busy, but also I think sometimes we assume that our colleagues know what's going on, even if it's an internal event. And I think if it's something, whether it's something that our Asian ERG is doing or our Black professionals ERG are doing, actually just reaching out to somebody, whether it's somebody that's sitting next to me who I know is not a part of those ERGs, to say, hey, I'm going to the breakfast, lunch and learn for the Black professionals ERG. Do you want to come? I think is really, obviously, if they've got a commitment, they can, but just actually extending the invite and sharing, because I think a lot of times our colleagues don't really know what's going on, is the kind of the easiest way to engage with them. And you'll be surprised at how many people do say, oh my God, I had no idea, I'll totally come with you. It's quite nice.
Good idea. Rather than go to another question, Catherine, I'll give you 1 minute to share your thoughts as well.
I think that's absolutely right what Jane said. I think that people don't know what they don't know. I also think that that what people can do is really look at their roles, and people tend to look at the DEI person as the expert. So they do their program, they do their initiatives, and then they go to the DEI person and say, hey, can you put your DEI lens on it? And I think that one of the things that I challenge everybody to do is be the person who's looking at those things, look at it through those lenses in everything that you do. Because if we all don't do that, we can go to things, we can go and learn about things, but we have to put it into practice.
Thank you. And while we're talking to you, just one shout out from the audience to you, Catherine. Thank you for mentioning the history of the importance of baseball and other sports in the incarceration camps in the 40s. I'm a 64-year-old Sansei. My grandparents, parents, aunts, and uncles were incarcerated, and it left an indelible impression on them. Thank you for your knowledge of history. So I'll echo that for all of our panelists. Thank you for your knowledge, your wisdom, and for being honest and open with sharing about yourself. And I think I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience members did as well. So yeah, just thank you so much for opening up and sharing about your experiences. Really appreciate that. For those of you in the audience, as Daryl mentioned, MLB.com/careers if you're interested in working in baseball. And to learn more about the critical work that the JACL is doing to advance civil rights, take a look at the info in the chat. You can become a member. You can attend the 53rd National Convention in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles. All are invited to that. So give them a follow on social media and check out jacl.org. To support this amazing organization that brought us here together today, as well as MLB. So thank you again to both those entities for having us. And thank you to the attendees for all watching and listening. And we'll see you all at the ballpark.